Join our community and become a member of the Dark Divide family. Here we can share our love for Evylyn's story, discuss theories, and even participate in our regular online book clubs. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep our connection stronger. And leave your mark in the comments section together. Chapter 9: Life and Death. Evylyn wished she wasn't a necromancer. To wield something mighty like a sword or staff would give her leverage against suspiciously shaped shadows lurking in the woods. But no. She had to choose to specialize in a type of magic that didn't work unless she was around a graveyard of death. Vareia said, the gentle caress of her tone doing little to soothe Evylyn's rising nerves. Are you okay? I didn't see anything. I know what I saw, Vareia. Evylyn snapped before slowly blinking and forcing herself to inhale evenly. Sorry, there's something in there. And I don't know if I want to know what it is. Vareia moved, brushing Evylyn's arm as she bent down, scooping up a handful of dirt. Evylyn could see the faint green glow of Vareia's eyes illuminating the dirt. She'd activated her forest light form. But why there was nothing in the woods for certain? Vareia only had Evylyn's word. Did she trust Evylyn that much? Or was she trying to make her feel better? A healthy mix of both maybe. When Evylyn snapped out of her distracted thoughts, she ripped her eyes away from Vareia. Back to the woods, her heart was racing, and her mouth was as dry as the barren desert. But she wasn't sure whether it was completely from nerves. Evylyn yearned for the sun. The moon was pretty and all, but the downcast on the trees around them provided scarce light. And what light they did get was muddled by the leafy canopy above them. The warmth and trickle of sunshine that bathed Evylyn in an ambient glow was much preferable to the murky darkness. Plus then she could actually see through the trees. The dirt cupped in Vareia's hand was blown into the air, each speck holding an illumination similar to Vareia's eyes as it faded into the air with a sharp pop. Vareia inhaled deeply before turning to Evylyn, not letting her forest light form falter just yet. There is someone there, she said, the passion in her gaze transitioning to something that looked like worry. She gnawed on her lip as she stood. I can't tell if they are immortal, or an animal. The scent wasn't strong enough. Do you know any light runes? Evylyn asked. To which Vareia shook her head. I know a lot of magic, but illusion magic isn't part of my knowledge. I was supposed to learn it, but my tribe leader never taught me before. They kicked me out. I've always wanted to learn it though. And she trailed off as she met Evylyn's pointed gaze. She cleared her throat. No, I know one, but it's been far too long since I've used it. I'm not sure I'd be able to even draw it correctly by now. Evylyn muttered, eyes widening upon the realization she was blabbering just as much as Vareia had been. Come on, silly, you're smart. Aren't light runes simple? If they are so simple, why don't you do one? Evylyn asked briskly. And when Vareia responded with a sheepish smile, Evylyn sighed, we don't need light anyway. Whoever is in there will be too scared to leave the shadows. She let her voice raise in volume, and Vareia grabbed her arm in alarm before quickly letting go. If there is someone in there, shouldn't we be quiet? Vareia practically hissed, to which Evylyn shrugged. Her glowing green eyes narrowed, and she turned to Ensceas. When the hulking man swiveled on his heel to face Vareia with a smile, Evylyn crossed her arms and resisted the urge to kick at the dirt. Do you know any light runes? Or at least a very potent fire spell? Vareia asked. Sure thing, little lady. Ensceas wasted no time drawing a rune that shifted to marmalade as the low hiss of crackling embers filled the clearing, drowning out Ensceas' content hums. Any reason you two were whispering up a storm? Vareia opened her mouth to respond, but clamped it shut as Evylyn spoke before she could. We think there's someone in the woods obviously. They are no match for us. But I'd rather not be stalked. She wanted Ensceas to trust her. She could tell he still didn't. She didn't blame him. Though most were not as quick to trust others as Vareia seemed to be. As they should be. But if she was upfront with her thoughts and could prove she wanted to help both Ensceas and Ensceas, maybe he would trust her. Maybe. As flame erupted into Ensceas' expectant hand, he let his other hand stray to the hammer resting on his hip. Dragging his gaze to the trees, he squinted. Then turned to Evylyn with a tilt of his head. Are you sure? He asked. Beard twitching as he scrunched his nose. Actually, I do smell something sour that isn't from my runespouter. Exactly, Evylyn said. She glanced at Vareia, who looked absolutely exhausted as she drew in a ragged, unsteady breath. It took a lot of energy to both activate and keep a higher state of immortality. And even though Vareia hadn't cast any spells, she would still be tired after this long of keeping her forest light form going. She stepped forward, gingerly resting a hand on Vareia's shoulder, who snapped her head to look at Evylyn. Like she'd forgotten she was there. What she said. Breathless. It's okay, Evylyn said. And Vareia's dazed gaze softened slightly. Thank you. But you don't need to keep doing this. I can tell you're exhausted. The words felt sticky and unnatural to say. Like Evylyn had swallowed something that had blocked her from speaking properly. Her voice had even quivered slightly. But Vareia either hadn't noticed or didn't care, as she released a long sigh. The bright green of her eyes fading back to their natural brown. Thanks, Vareia said quietly. The single word breathy and uneven. Evylyn noticed the sun griffin seemed to have returned. And it nuzzled its beak against Vareia's leg. I appreciate it. Evylyn responded with a squeeze of her hand before she let it drop and stood up straight to face Ensceas, who was now patrolling the outskirts of the small clearing with his trusty flame. Find anything? She asked Ensceas, who shook his head before he froze. Who are you? Evylyn could faintly hear Ensceas ask, his voice becoming gruff after a moment of silence. Evylyn called out, do you recognize them? No. Came Ensceas' delayed reply. Before he shuffled to the side. The bush beneath him parted slightly. And someone half Ensceas' size waddled out. They seemed to be a kelmite, with purple feathers covering their body. Their small wings fluttered slightly. And if it wasn't for the graying feathers that acted as hair, or the twinkle of elderly knowledge set in their green eyes, Evylyn would have assumed they were a child. Hello. They said cheerily, I've lost my way. I was traveling to Wield from Juenta's temple. I left a surplus of offerings, but she didn't visit me. Evylyn's brows furrowed together. And Ensceas rested a hand against his beard. Vareia, on the other hand, leapt to her feet. You're lost. She exclaimed. We can help you. Oh please. The kelmite said with a beaky smile. I lost my map to the recent storm. So I've been wandering around aimlessly since. Shouldn't someone of their age know their way around Ensceas without a map? The thought was all the more suspicious the more Evylyn pondered it. If this person was a frequenter of Juenta's temple, wouldn't they know the path by heart? She didn't voice her concerns just yet. She didn't want to seem like she was dampening the mood, especially if the others were trusting this kelmite. If she was constantly doubting everything, they'd likely cast her out soon enough. No matter how much Vareia insisted she liked Evylyn. If you head north, there will be a dirt path that should lead you to a main road. Vareia said, beaming. Can you show me? Vareia blinked before her smile widened. Sure. Do you need all of us know? The kelmite returned the grin, though it was slimy. Their green eyes pinned Ensceas down, who raised an eyebrow. Just the Ixney. What? Why? Ensceas asked, taking a step back as his large hand tightened around the hilt of his hammer. And that's when Evylyn noticed it. Tucked beneath the Kelmite's shirt was a cloaking stone, a powerful magic artifact that could disguise the wearer with any appearance they chose. This Kelmite likely wasn't a Kelmite at all. As Evylyn opened her mouth to warn Ensceas, she could see a glint of gold from behind the Kelmite. Ensceas, watch out, she blurted out. Ensceas turned to her, but before he could respond. Move anything. A pained screech tore throughout the woods. Ensceas crumpled to his knees. The white of his shirt staining red, as blood crawled throughout his skin. Now? Evylyn could see someone had been behind him, and she recognized that someone all too quickly. Judge? His marmalade eyes were alight with mad delight as a crooked, broken smile stretched across his lips. He took his time removing the weapon he'd struck Ensceas with an axe. Evylyn was realizing the crazed one. For Ensceas to be struck by that. He'd be lucky if he wanted to be alive now. The axe, a relic of Britannia's, corrupted you from the inside out. It created a space for Britannia to slip into your mind and whisper unholy, venomous words that would tempt you to doubt reality. Evylyn had never personally seen the weapon in effect, but she'd heard nothing but bad things about its usage. A gurgled choke struggled to leave Ensceas' lips as he coughed, a splatter of crimson staining the grass. Evylyn was frozen in place, frozen in time. As she helplessly watched, she'd seen death before. It never rattled her then. Ensceas hadn't even died, so why couldn't she move? She looked up at Judge, who wiped his bloody axe with a bare hand. Droplets fell from his peach skin to the grass. And when she looked to her side, Vareia was gone. Vareia. Evylyn tried to speak the word, nothing came out, but a drawn-out breath. She tried to move, but remained still. Judge stepped towards her, then she saw her. Vareia had rushed to Ensceas' side and had his head in her lap, as she whispered in frenzied bursts. Judge saw her too, slowly turning his head as Evylyn stared in horrified obedience. He would kill Vareia next. He'd somehow obtained a goddess's relic, one of the only things that a mortal could wield to kill a demigod with. Vareia would be left to watch the woman she'd trusted do nothing but comply. Not because she wanted to, but because she could not do otherwise. Judge raised his axe, swiftly moving towards Vareia, and like a phantom took hold of Evylyn's body. She was ripped from her icy prison. She dashed forward, hair lifting into a black cloud as her eyes blazed more ferociously. A crimson wave of energy soared from her hand, slicing into Judge's hand. Judge dropped the axe with a hiss, fixating his attention on Evylyn, who had closed the distance between them. Though Evylyn was shorter than Judge, it did not feel that way as she seized his hands with her own. A bleating cry similar to an infant's bubbled at Judge's lips as Evylyn's grip tore through Judge's hands. Steam rose into the air as his skin darkened, burning under her touch. She didn't say death followed her everywhere for no reason, though no words had been exchanged. All the maniacal joy had vanished from Judge's eyes. In its place was raw fear. And though he still said nothing, the message written in his features was clear: mercy. A daughter of death can only be so merciful, she said. Cold venom laced throughout her words as she tightened her grip on Judge. He cried beneath her might, tears pricking at his eyes, pathetic. Your days were numbered the second you sought me out. Please, he finally said, shoulders racked by a violent sob as his voice choked. I'll leave you alone, just let me go. Though blood rushed through Evylyn's ears, muddling her hearing, she could hear the faint cry of the sun griffin nearby. It sounded panicked, But Evylyn turned a blind eye to it for the moment. If she took her burning gaze off Judge for a mere second, she wasn't sure what he would pull. Dropping her voice into a dark hiss, she narrowed her glowing eyes. "You're familiar with death, aren't you? Well, why don't I show you a thing or two I know?" With that, Evylyn's glowing lavender gaze seemed to pierce right through Judge. Moans echoed throughout the forest as the corpses of animals long gone rose to her command. Evylyn released her grip, and Judge fell to his knees, but it didn't matter. Her army had arrived. They dealt a swift hand of justice. Evylyn blinked, and Judge had been dragged into the shadowy depths he'd used as refuges just minutes before. His screams still ripped through the forest, shaking the trees as his cries slowly faded. The second she could feel his life force fade, she rushed to Vareia's side. She let her form falter as she knelt down, gently grabbing one of Vareia's shaking wrists with her own steady hand. His fading, she whispered voice choked by a sob. "I can't." Vareia. Before Evylyn could continue, Vareia's bright eyes had shifted back to the pale green she'd become uncomfortably familiar with. She didn't have much energy left. Evylyn knew that. Her form would fall soon. But Vareia didn't seem to care. Drawing runes into the ground, Evylyn faintly recognized them as a mix of nature and healing runes. And as newly bloomed flowers began to sprout, Evylyn realized what Vareia was trying to do. She was trying to heal everything around Ensceas in hopes the magic would seep into his body if a direct shot wasn't enough. "Please, please," she said, her voice barely audible as more flowers curled around Ensceas' body. But Ensceas' body wasn't healing, and the gash in his stomach was only oozing more and more blood by the second. And suddenly, Ensceas ripped his hand up from the flower confine it had been trapped under. It violently shook, but he took Vareia's hand in his own as he slightly cracked open his eye. "Vareia, Ensceas," she breathed, a hopeful spark lighting in her eyes. "Tell Griner I love them," he said, voice shuddering as harshly as his body. He gritted his teeth as he forced in a shaking breath. "And take this eye, it will help you." He drew another rune, similar to the one he'd used to summon fire. Once he cast it, a shower of what Evylyn recognized as flame powder dropped into the palm of his hand after he let his hand fall to the earth. Flame powder, it will help you. It's imbued with my life force." Something within the crack of his eye Evylyn could see had already faded. Please don't resurrect me, my mind will be gone," he said, meeting Evylyn's eyes, who could only give him a slight nod. Thank you, I'm sorry for my mistrust, and good luck in saving the town." "No," Vareia said, ripping her hand from Evylyn's as she continued to draw runes into the ground. Flowers erupted, decorating a grisly, bloody battlefield with beautiful chaos. "No." But Ensceas had fallen, his body had gone cold, and Evylyn was going to respect his wishes. Vareia said nothing more as she tore herself away from Ensceas, tears staining her beautiful face as she buried herself into Evylyn's awaiting arms. Word count 2320,000. A random bolded word in a chapter indicates where I've passed a milestone. QOTC LOL, I'm sorry I had to add angst. Chapter 10, Immortal Closure. Vareia whispered into Evylyn's dress, hands tightly clutching fistfuls of the fabric. She was squeezing Evylyn so tightly she felt as though she was going to pop. But Vareia's touch sent warmth shooting throughout her body. In a frigid, dark forest with others, she'd shrug them off, push them away, insult them if they dared to touch her. She'd never willingly touched anyone, she'd averted it for as long as she could remember. And now not only was she touching Vareia, she was practically seeking it out. Any time someone had touched her in the past, It had sent unpleasant cold chills up her spine. Vareia was the opposite. And Evylyn wasn't sure she wanted to let go. So she strengthened her hold on Vareia. Unsure of what to do besides close her eyes and hope the rhythmic rise and fall of her own chest would help calm Vareia's uneven pants. "It's not your fault," she said. She wasn't sure what else to say. "If I hadn't trusted that Kel might. EP3-END would be alive," Evylyn Vareia replied. Voice wobbling and instead of lending more words of comfort, Evylyn lifted her lavender gaze to the trees. In all the commotion, she'd completely forgotten about the Kelmite. It seemed Vareia hadn't noticed the concealment stone looped around the Kelmite's neck. But Evylyn wasn't about to tell her when she could barely say a full sentence. "Wait here," she said, standing. It didn't quite feel like she had control of her motions anymore. She felt like a puppet being pulled by the strings, pushed to do something she wasn't sure she should do. "What? Wait, Evylyn, don't leave me," Vareia said. Though Evylyn barely heard it. Between the hushed volume and the blood that was rushing to her ears in hot rage. It only took a minute of searching with a pitiful flame in the palm of her hand to find the so-called Kelmite. They were hiding behind a tree. But one of their arms had been completely visible. Evylyn yanked them by the collar of their shirt, dragging them to the clearing and practically throwing them to the ground. They landed with a pained groan, chest rapidly rising as their skin gleamed with slick sweat. With a swift yank, Evylyn snatched the concealment stone from their neck, breaking it with ease. The feathers adorning their skin fluttered to the ground before vanishing, all part of the illusion. In front of her sat a Lasocian. Dark blue skin flushed as their cerulean eyes met Evylyn's. She recognized them. They'd been sitting in Judge's under-over when he'd brought her there. Rage flooded her bloodstream, rendering her mind clouded and vision blinded as she knelt down, grabbing the Lasocian and pulling them close. Though she hated looking people in the eye, she was determined to make this Lasocian squirm. And squirm they did as their eyes rapidly fluttered. "Why?" she seethed, skin burning as hot as her words as she struggled to keep her temper from sparking. While she knew she wasn't quick to real anger, once someone had gotten a rise out of her, she could hardly contain herself, and this monster had been the reason Vareia's friend had died. "You're going to need to be more specific than that," they said, laughing a bit, though their clammy skin revealed they were still nervous. Why did you do it?" she said. Voice nearly a yell, her hands started to shake, though she did not relent on her ironclad hold. "Well, that's what the big boss told me to do. He told me I'd get a handsome share of the bounty placed on your pretty little head," the Lasocian said, a sliver of a taunting smile dancing on their lips. "You're not understanding what I'm saying," Evylyn growled. And the Lasocian's eyes widened before dipping downwards. "Why did you target the Ixni? Why not me? I'm the one you wanted. You didn't need to hurt innocents." "Couldn't tell why. Boss said he'd take care of the rest. And all I'd have to do is distract you lot and praise the gods, get your hands off me, that burns." The Lasocian yelped, wincing. They tried to pull themselves away from Evylyn. To no avail. She glanced down and realized she'd accidentally activated her Delvianic form. And her touch was literally burning through every layer the Lasocian was wearing. But she didn't care. "Do you feel no remorse for what you did?" "Not really. No, if the pay is good enough, I'll do anything I'm told by XYTYX. I should end you here and now," she said. Voice a deep growl. "Would you like to follow in the same footsteps as your boss?" "I'm calling your bluff, Evylyn," they said. Though their voice was not nearly as nonchalant as their words, it was clear they were in pain. "I don't think you can kill another soul, not tonight. At least, Vareia's mercy with Judge had gotten her friend killed. As much as Evylyn didn't and wouldn't verbally admit it. She'd done it out of the good of her heart. And as much as Vareia insisted otherwise. Evylyn knew she did not have nearly as much good in her heart as Vareia did. She'd been born from the depths of death. Trained to take life and reanimate it to her will. And most importantly, to never have mercy because many times those who died did not deserve her mercy. So she tightened her grip. The low hissing that had filled the woods rose in volume and pitch, accompanied by an acrid burning smell and a cry from the Lesothian. "Did your boss not tell you who I am?" she asked lowly, not daring to rip her eyes away from the Lesothian. "What I'm known for, no," they said, unsteadily swallowing with their head bobbing. They raised their hands clearly defenseless. Evylyn wasn't sure what their plan was. If they truly didn't have a weapon, what if they hadn't believed them at all? And simply attacked? Not really. "All he told us was that you were. I'm known for being created from horrors you cannot fathom. The sweet release of death is what you'll be begging for once I'm done with you. And the mercy of meeting your end is not something I will provide." Their snuffled cries transitioned into shrill screams of pain as they blindly fumbled for Evylyn's hands. She didn't give them the chance to grab her. Her hands clasped around their neck, the skin burning and sizzling as their cries were abruptly cut off. "Are you happy?" she hissed. The fierce glow of her eyes enough to bathe the Lesothian in an ominous light. "I've avoided this for years. And you've gone and dug it back up." They couldn't respond. All that escaped their lips was a pitiful whine. Evylyn Vareia's voice rang out, crisp but choked in the night's air. And that's all it took for Evylyn to let her hold go lax. "Be merciful, but please," Vareia said. And even though Evylyn didn't look at her, she could tell the Cimabile was crying. "Give them what Ensceas should have received." Evylyn froze, slowly trailing her gaze up the Lesothian's body until she met their eyes. Wide and glazed with fear. She let her eyes fall to the forest floor, which was still decorated sparsely with Vareia's flowers. She let go. The Lesothian wasted no time in scrambling to their feet, the sizzling sound of their skin fading as they scampered away. Evylyn let her hands fall to her lap as she stared blankly at the ground, her hair returning to its usual form. She wasn't supposed to give mercy. She was a reaper. Why had she done that? Evylyn, Vareia repeated. And this time Evylyn glanced behind her, reaching a hand to her eyes. She could feel dampness fall onto her fingers. She was crying. She still hadn't quite gotten used to that. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She returned her gaze to her lap. And before she knew it, Vareia had appeared at her side. The Cimabile did not touch Evylyn. Her puffy eyes were wide-crested with unshed tears. "Why'd you leave?" Vareia said, her voice so quiet Evylyn practically couldn't hear her. I don't know. I saw red just thinking about how they'd hurt you. I didn't care what they'd done to me. I'm used to that, but with you." Vareia was silent for a moment before sighing. "It hurt me when you didn't say we were working together. It was so small and you corrected it afterwards. But working with you these past few weeks has been the most fun I've ever had. I know this is completely unrelated, but I don't know, I needed to get it off my chest. It's been eating at me. I was scared if I brought it up you'd leave me." "Leave you? You made it seem like you didn't care for anyone. I can't exactly say I blame you. But you were second-guessing everything I did for you. I know it's hard when the world seems like it's against you. And that's why I didn't give up." "But why?" Her question was ambiguous, but somehow Evylyn knew exactly what she meant. "I've been chased and cornered more times than I can count. I should have died at least 10 times wherever I go. Someone wants me dead even if I've done nothing. At first I tried to be understanding. They are scared of what I can do. But even if I didn't use it to harm them, they didn't trust me. I'd sworn off necromancy magic for years, to see if I'd be given a second chance. But when they saw what I am, they cast me out again. They think I'm a monster. She paused, memories of what had just happened flashing in her mind. She wrung her hands together, letting her gaze fall to her trembling fingers. All she could see were the hands of a bloodstained savage. And maybe they are right, they are not right, Vareia said, hesitating before lifting a hand to wipe Evylyn's tears away. She hadn't even noticed they'd fallen, and at first she'd flinched as Vareia made contact with her skin. Then she relaxed. They are scared of what they don't understand. But that doesn't mean they are right for lashing out. Evylyn swallowed the rising knot in her throat, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Are you afraid of me? No, Vareia responded, almost immediately, though tears still dribbled down her plump cheeks. Her voice was steady. Have I been hurt? Yes. Have I been angry? Admittedly, yes. But I've never been scared, even when I nope. Vareia took Evylyn's hand in her own, and warmth surged through Evylyn's cold fingertips. But her movements were slow, uncertain. Evylyn wasn't sure whether it was because of her, or because she was processing Ensceas' loss. Not any more scared than you were when I showed Judge who's boss. I am sorry for what happened to Ensceas, Evylyn said after a moment. I saw it coming, but I was too scared to speak up. She didn't elaborate, but Vareia seemed to pick up on what she meant as she nodded. I shouldn't have shown that much kindness in the first place. I'm still getting the hang of balancing when to be nice and when to be mean. It's kind of nice, honestly. You balance out all the bitterness I exude. Vareia laughed, and it sounded like melodic music to Evylyn's ears. A tear trickled down Vareia's cheek. He would have liked you if he had the chance to know you more. I mean. Evylyn remained silent. He was one of the reasons I was able to change. I was born into the Vareia hunters. They taught me to show no mercy like you. The only mercy we could provide was giving our prey a swift death. Mortals, they suffered at our hands, and no one felt remorse. I hadn't questioned my upbringing until I was face to face with a mortal who looked nothing short of terrified. He begged me for mercy and I froze. He took the chance to run and I'm glad he did, because I finally had an epiphany. I could be more than I was built to be, so I left. They didn't bother looking for me. Vareia paused, sighing as a sorrowful smile graced her lips. She left, her gaze trained on the flowers she'd grown, and her eyes shone with unshed tears. And then I met Ensceas. He showed me kindness when no one else did. Every time I was rude or bitter or flat out mean, he just laughed it off and excused it. Maybe I didn't deserve it, but he saw the good in me and was determined to dig it up. Like me. So when we met and you pushed me away, I knew I had to do what Ensceas had done for me. And I'm not sure if it's worked, but you seem happier now, so I'd say it's a success. But I have one question for you. Why pretend you're doing this all alone? Vareia lifted her eyes to Evylyn, who bit her lip and forced herself not to avert her gaze. She drew in a deep breath, which caught in her throat. I've been forced to work alone my entire life. I'm not used to having someone I can actually rely on. And I don't know, I wasn't thinking straight. It wasn't right of me. I wouldn't have gotten this far without you. Are you sure you don't, hate me? The question was ridiculous. It was clear both women knew that. And before she knew it, Evylyn was blurting out, You mean a lot to me, Vareia. I didn't know how to say that. I'm not very good with emotions. But I know now I care about you a lot. More than anyone I've met before maybe. You've shown me kindness and mercy and I'm still not sure I deserved it. But thank you for not giving up on me. Vareia was silent for a moment before she leaned her head against Evylyn's shoulder. Her hand was still wrapped around Evylyn's. You're welcome. Evylyn's face burned hot at her admittance. But she simply averted her gaze. After a few minutes of content silence, she shattered the peace by asking, do you want to give Ensceas a proper burial? I would love to, Vareia murmured. But before they could, something deep within the woods rustled. Evylyn's head snapped up, and her hand had subconsciously raised in preparation. She then remembered the sun griffin she'd left it. And she hadn't seen it since before Judge had been dragged off. Had it died, Vareia, she started, but trailed off as the sun griffin scampered out into the clearing. Evylyn stilled, but Vareia looked up. And though she was crying, a broad smile grew on her face. She rushed forward, scooping up the sun griffin in her arms as she nuzzled it against her cheek. The sun griffin tittered happily, closing its eyes. The rustling hadn't stopped, however, and a larger figure emerged from the shadows. The sun griffin's mother, Evylyn assumed, with golden feathers and strong paws. Her beak was smeared with blood, and somehow Evylyn knew it was Judge's blood. The sun griffin's mother had finished him off. She said nothing. Vareia drew her gaze away from the baby, meeting the mother's gaze, and she held out the baby, whispering something inaudible. The mother gestured to the ground with her head, and Vareia gently placed it onto the grass. It glanced back, cawing before bounding behind its mother into the woods. The mother followed a moment later, after its eyes shone with warmth. Vareia had been kind to the sun griffin for no reason. While Evylyn didn't know what exactly they'd said to each other, she assumed it was some kind of thanks for keeping the baby safe. And Vareia had done it for no reason other than out of the good of her heart. Evylyn strangely felt inclined to do something similar. Once she'd let Vareia stare into the woods for an uncomfortably long time. She cleared her throat, making sure her voice was gentle. Would you like to bury him? Vareia turned to her and nodded. And so Evylyn helped her, though she'd be lying if she said she wasn't uncomfortable with how much dirt and grime she'd touched. Luckily for her, Vareia was able to manipulate the dirt, creating a grave for Ensceas in no time. They'd buried him together. Evylyn had shed a tear, and Vareia hadn't stopped crying the entire time. Vareia finished by decorating the grave with the flowers she'd grown around Ensceas' body. Now, Evylyn held the flame powder he'd gifted them in her hands. It was a small amount, but he'd said he had more in his house. If they had the gall to go back to a home without its heart. What do you say we try to figure out this spell together? Evylyn asked, to which Vareia smiled, contrasting a face streaked with stains of tears. I'd love to. It was a simple process. Evylyn had drawn a rune a week prior, combining both healing and necromancy runes. It was an odd amalgamation of symbols, but she prayed it would work. She was able to draw her half effortlessly, and Vareia did the same. The contrasting sides of life and death blazed. The darkness of night and the lightness of a new dawn bathing the clearing in an ethereal glow. It shimmered, and Evylyn wasted no time in assembling the other ingredients below it. She had a small cauldron, filled to the brim with her tangible ingredients. It bubbled under the heat of the rune, and as the two women cast the rune together, the magic soared down into the mix below. When the soupy mixture did not change in the slightest, Evylyn knew she had failed for now. But instead of getting angry or upset, or anything she'd typically feel, she simply laughed. With Vareia by her side, word count 23,336 20,000. A random bolded word in a chapter indicates where I've passed a milestone. QOTC, what do you think of the story so far? Do you think they'll be able to figure out the recipe soon? Chapter 11, Depths of Death. Flame powder in hand. Evylyn was determined to get this attempt right. She'd been slowly trickling down on supply, desperate to not let his parting gift go to waste. And every time, she'd failed to craft a potion that wouldn't kill someone the moment it touched their lips. She'd almost given up multiple times, in fact. But Vareia had pushed her to keep going, telling her, "If I haven't died from being around you yet, then death doesn't follow you everywhere." Truth be told, she found it hard to believe Vareia. Even if she knew the cute demigoddess was telling the truth. Vareia didn't lie unless she was glumly speaking her thoughts aloud, saying her naivety was the reason Ensceas was killed. Evylyn had tried to comfort her the best she could. But she wasn't an emotional person at all. She'd learned the hard way that she didn't have the words to console someone who felt even minor things far more strongly than Evylyn ever had. She also hadn't been able to stomach facing Griner. Even if Ensceas' blood technically wasn't on her hands, she didn't want to have to tell a fellow demigod that their partner, who should have lived forever, died. Helping her gain her own pride back, pride, independence, freedom, whatever it was Evylyn could reap from helping the town of Ensceas. She wasn't sure it was worth the cost of Ensceas' life. She'd barely known him, sure. But Vareia clearly cared about him. And Evylyn didn't blame her. Based on what she'd told Evylyn, the Cimmerbille's eyes were puffy. Her skin seemed to be permanently damp from the tears that dripped down her cheeks. And her voice carried a hoarse croak that didn't seem to go away. And yet, despite that, Vareia was doing her best to help her. She'd done her part of the spell without complaint. She'd hardly left Evylyn's side. And she'd offered admittedly unhelpful advice whenever Evylyn hit a roadblock. But even if her words of wisdom were not all that intelligent, it warmed both Evylyn's heart and cheeks that Vareia cared so much. Now, after pulling Evylyn outside, Vareia sat next to her. In the soil of Ensceas' garden, soft, colorful flowers dotted the ground, swaying in the gentle breeze. Vareia's gaze was fixated on the ground, in shades of golden honey and bronzes, as if the threads of the earth beneath them lived within her eyes. And then she looked up. Evylyn, having been playing with the fabric of her skirt, stilled. A playful smile danced on Vareia's plump lips as she tilted her head. "What are you looking at?" she asked you, Evylyn said. She'd scarcely danced around the truth, and she made sure others knew that. Vareia had certainly learned of Evylyn's blunt attitude. But unlike mortals, she didn't seem to care much. And if she didn't care, Evylyn would let her know if she thought she was pretty. Why? Vareia's grin flashed wider, the lines near her innocent eyes deepening. It was like she knew what Evylyn would say. "You're just..." Evylyn's gaze fell to her lap, and she smoothed out the piece of paper resting on her leg. Beautiful. Though Evylyn didn't look up, she could easily hear Vareia's sharp inhale and the gentle rustling of the grass and flowers beneath her. And before she knew it, Vareia had slowly crawled into Evylyn's peripheral vision. "Really?" Vareia said, a new layer of joy ringing brightly in her voice. "You mean it?" "Of course I do, I don't lie," Evylyn said. And when Vareia's eyes crinkled, Evylyn found herself smiling. "I figured you'd know this by now, V." Vareia scooted away, plopping herself back down in the dirt. A flower's base grew taller, And she let the green vine curl around her awaiting finger. I do, and after a moment she was saying, "You're pretty too." Evylyn's smile widened, though she remained silent, as she continued her corrections on her rune. Every swipe of her quill hopefully moved her one step closer to solving this disease. The paper was a messy blotch of black swabs, but Evylyn could easily decipher her side. She'd left Vareia's half as untouched as possible. A few minutes later, she let her quill rest on the tree stump she was sitting on. She ran a finger over the parchment once it had dried, and raised her gaze up to Vareia's expectant smile. "I think it's ready, sure." She'd said that the past 3 attempts, but she felt more confident this time probably. They'd set up a makeshift camp outside the day before, with a small fire pit, and heavy sticks jammed in the dirt in the shape of a spit that held a precariously bound iron pot. Luckily it hadn't rained, and Vareia knew some beginner fire magic, thanks to her days as a Valeriac hunter. So Evylyn hadn't needed to worry about the flames going out, and she was grateful for that. As stressing over starting a fire, when she didn't know fire magic, while simultaneously trying to save a town likely wasn't in her best interest. "You've got this," Vareia cheered, throwing her hands in the air before letting them fall to her lap. She was sitting cross-legged as her hands gripped her knees, her curly hair swaying softly in the whistling breeze. "We'll see," Evylyn responded as she began to draw the rune. Though her words were heavy, her tone was light. The threat of losing the last of Ensceas' flame powder weighed heavily on her shoulder. But he'd left a supply stocked in his house. Evylyn had seen it both the day before and when Ensceas had showed them around the house. The only issue was it would be far less potent than the powder he'd given Evylyn, as the powder she held in her hands was imbued with the magic of Ensceas' soul. The stuff in his house was well ordinary. It would serve well in curing the town, but she needed something more powerful if she was going to heal Ensceas' immortal partner. The rune harvested from Evylyn's own soul slowly shifted from a pearly white to an inky black as it crackled with death. If she needed to use runespouter, she would have had to wait for the powder to solidify in the air before she could cast it. Thankfully she was a demigoddess. With each intricate detail she added, the giant rune seemed to growl louder, pleased by her additions. Evylyn always believed she should have pursued painting instead of necromancy, her ability to draw the smallest, most ridiculous detail on the first try was practically unrivaled. And that was proven true, as Vareia nearly stumbled over the first swipe of her finger. Though the rune did not stagger or grow jagged, Evylyn found herself bracing for a rupture of the rune. Luckily, if it did go wrong, Evylyn could break the rune herself before it was cast and save the remaining flame powder. But Evylyn trusted Vareia to be able to do it successfully. She had before, and even if she hadn't, the determined twinkle set in her eyes would have assured Evylyn she'd be trying her best regardless. So she got on one knee and tossed the flame powder in her palm into the warming pot. Combining it with echo dust was the easy part. The powders mingled, swirling into one as they liquefied and became a sparkling, copper-colored mixture. Now came the hard part. The part Evylyn had dreaded before. She'd been able to crush the elderberries ahead of time, and while smashing the berries with a book or rock worked, it was far more effective for her to use her hands. She didn't know why, but she'd tried both methods, with the same rune pattern, and the berries she'd crushed with her bare hands rendered better results. She could ask Vareia to do it, but she felt like that was cheating. She'd come so far, she'd evolved, she'd adapted, and she'd done things she never believed she would. To stop the progress she'd made, because she was scared of smearing globs of berry juice on her skin and feeling the berries pop under her grip, would be a slap in the face to both her and Vareia. So she pulled herself to her full height, Inhaling deeply, she closed her eyes for a moment, but snapped them open the second she felt the gentle touch of Vareia's hand in her own. Both her warm smile and hand were enough to melt Evylyn's icy grip, and to an extent her heart. She curled her free hand into a fist, resisting the urge to shudder as the berries squelched and popped under her fingers. The juice dripped out from her fist before she opened her hand and let the chunks of berries fall into the pot, while slimy residue remained on her hand. The thought of its texture was pushed to the back of Evylyn's mind as she took a deep breath. "You did a good job," she said as she looked up at the rune hanging above them. The rune was picture perfect, and if Evylyn hadn't seen Vareia nearly slip, she would have thought the Cimabile did it flawlessly without any roadblocks. "Well, I had a great teacher," Vareia replied, leaning her head against Evylyn's arm. Evylyn was silent for a moment before quietly asking, "Why don't you cast at me?" Vareia's shock was palpable, and her eyes widened as she dropped Evylyn's hand and stared at her. "I don't you deserve to," Evylyn said softly. After Vareia's honey-brown gaze searched Evylyn's lavender eyes for a moment, she dipped her head in a nod. Though it was difficult for her to reach the rune, she was able to after a moment of stretching on her toes, and the tips of her fingers swatted the bottom of the rune. And to Evylyn's surprise and satisfaction, the rune exploded exactly like it should have. A ball of pure energy, bands of gold and black blending together, floated in the air, hissing and smoking with both death and life. Vareia slowly guided her hand down, and the orb obeyed, flying into the cauldron. A plume of grey smoke rose into the air, the bittersweet smell of jasmine and roses wafting around them. Once the smoke cleared, Evylyn peered into the pot, and her heart skipped a beat. It had worked. A golden mixture, swirled with specks of silver and black, boiled within the pot, waves lapping over one another gently. The flame beneath the pot extinguished as Vareia snapped her fingers, and Evylyn could already sense the heat from the iron beginning to cool. "Yes," Vareia squealed, and practically jumped in the air as she wrapped her arms around Evylyn in a constricting hug. Evylyn's eyes widened, but once she realized what Vareia was doing, she slowly returned the hug. And once Vareia realized what she'd done, she dropped back to her feet, rubbing the back of her neck as a blush crawled across her cheeks. "Sorry, I wasn't thinking." "Don't be," Evylyn smiled, turning to the pot. "It finally worked, of course." Evylyn didn't know if the potion would cure anyone, but the fact the rune hadn't faltered like it continuously had every time in the past was certainly a good sign. "So if this works, what do you want to do? Head into town?" "No," Evylyn shook her head. "We'll stay here and make more batches. Mostly because I want to be prepared, but I'm just not ready to go back to Ensceas yet." She was determined to not be faceless the next time she ventured into town. She would hold her head high and proud, and she would not let those who opposed her stop her from saving her name. Once the cauldron had chilled enough for her to pick it up, Evylyn did so and headed inside with Vareia. Being inside Ensceas' house for a good reason felt like a weight off Evylyn's shoulders, and the relief helped calm her nerves slightly. Unfortunately, Gryna still looked as sick as ever, perhaps even more sick. Their dry skin had developed a scaly rash, and their breathing was labored, coming in quick pants that made Evylyn's chest ache just watching. Without a word, Vareia took the pot from Evylyn's hands, and Evylyn didn't protest. The Cimabile walked over to the bed and without fear rested a hand against Gryna's cheek. They moved beneath the covers slightly, though they made no sound. "We are here to help, Gryna," Vareia whispered, tenderness shimmering in her large eyes. They didn't respond. Evylyn had to wonder if they could sense Ensceas was gone. It would explain their deteriorating state. Vareia lifted the pot to their lips and tipped the contents inside. There was only enough for one entity to drink. And luckily, Vareia managed to keep her grip steady and steer the potion into Gryna's mouth successfully. Perhaps more luckily, Gryna wouldn't die from a botched potion. So even if it didn't work, Evylyn didn't have to worry about causing another death. With bated breath, Evylyn watched moments passed. And nothing happened, but then the rash adorning their skin faded. The heat exuding from their body dulled, and then they opened their striking purple eyes. Their gaze studied the two women standing before them for a moment before it softened. Vareia, they said, their voice a hoarse croak high. Gryna. Vareia said, tears shining in her eyes. It's good to see you again, you two dear. A small, shaky smile formed on Gryna's face. Before their eyebrows upturned, where is Ensceas? Vareia stilled, and that seemed to clue Gryna in. Oh. They said, voice barely a whisper. They sniffed. But the tears that formed in their eyes were both melancholic and joyful. He gave his life for me, didn't he? He did. They nodded. Evylyn could tell they were holding back an outpouring of emotions, likely for when Evylyn and Vareia left the room. Very typical of him. Once I die, I'll be giving him a stern talking to. Vareia laughed. A melodic jingle before she turned to Evylyn. The biggest smile Evylyn had ever seen graced the beautiful Cimabelle's face. And she rushed over to Evylyn, eyes shining brightly. Evylyn could tell she'd be talking to Gryna soon. Especially considering how the demigod's gaze was intently fixated on their blanket. Empty and blank, but for now. She was squealing to Evylyn, you did it, no. Evylyn took Vareia's hand in her own, lips curling up in a smile. We did this together. Word count 25 783 20,000. A random bolded word in a chapter indicates where I've passed a milestone. QOTC, do you think they'll be able to cure the town? Or will they be turned away before they are even able to try? Chapter 12, facing her fears. Evylyn had taken 2 weeks to hide away inside their house, under the guise of preparation. She was not ready to face the world again. Last time she'd faced a noose that sure wouldn't have killed her. But it was the sentiment that counted. Vareia had been patient, Gryna had been patient. And yet, despite the fact that her own fears were keeping her back, Evylyn had been impatient. Not towards Vareia or Gryna. She was impatient with herself for letting her negative thoughts run rampant in her mind. She sighed. Glass bottles clinking together under her grasp as she poured the next batch of the antidote into the mouth. It was a slightly more dull gold, but it still shimmered as though Evylyn had taken an ore of gold directly from the side of a stream. Thanks to Gryna, they'd be able to transport multiple solutions at a time. Ensceas had been both their partner and mentor, and he'd taught them how to manipulate glass, which led to a mountain of glass bottles sitting before Evylyn. She glanced at Vareia, who was smiling at Gryna, and swallowed the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. Her gaze fell back to the bottle she was holding, and she fidgeted with the sling, running the frayed rope through her fingers. She knew she was attracted to Vareia, and as much as she prided herself on her ability to be direct, she couldn't be direct with this. She didn't know why. She'd never had an issue with it in the past. But granted, whenever she told others what she thought of them, it usually ended with them upset with her. While she didn't understand that either, she supposed she didn't care. And after she'd told Vareia she hadn't feared telling the truth, she had no issue telling the Cimabelle she was beautiful. Because she was, but it felt different. And scary, and Evylyn hated it all. Hey Evie. Vareia's cheerful voice snapped her out of her melancholic thoughts. And she looked up. Do you think you're ready? Ready for going into the town? She was far less prepared than she'd like to be. Following plans and mentally preparing herself for ages was how she rolled. She did not like Vareia's spontaneity and tendency to pull her into situations she never wanted to be in. But maybe that's how Evylyn was supposed to grow. Because she sure as hell hadn't grown much spending years in forced solitude. Facing the town, Vareia said. Though her voice was softer now. It's all right if you're not ready, Evylyn stilled. Staring at her glassy reflection in the bottle. And the demigoddess, who looked back at her, looked timid. Afraid, exactly what Evylyn didn't want to be. I'm ready, she said, glancing up at Vareia, who had been playing with her hands. Oh, Vareia said. Chocolate eyes widening and eyelashes flittering. Are you sure? She nodded. Hand straying to her dress, as she balled the fabric up into her hand. I'm sure. So Vareia took her by the hand, and led her outside before Evylyn could say any more. With Griner trailing behind them. Evylyn weighed the single bottle she'd brought in her hand. Fingers tightening around the clear glass. She had one shot to get this right. So she'd only need one antidote. And as Vareia guided her deeper into Ensceas, Evylyn looked up. And could see nearly every mortal walking the stony streets was ogling at her like she was some exotic prize. Her face burned hot. And her hand instinctively jumped to her hood. Ready to pull it up. But something tugged at her hand. She looked down. And Vareia was looking up at her. A kindly smile stretching across her lips. Evylyn's breath hitched in her throat. And after a moment, she allowed her shaking hand to fall to her side. She wasn't quite sure where Vareia was even taking her. They hadn't discussed what they'd do once in the city. They hadn't talked about how they were going to solve this. Evylyn gulped. But as Vareia led her past the heart of the city and towards the corpse of Ensceas' dragon, Evylyn knew exactly where they were going. To the very council that had made her name illegal. Don't worry, Vareia said. Squeezing Evylyn's hand as they approached the gates. Evylyn hadn't a clue how no one had stopped them. Especially when it seemed like she had been recognized. But she was going to chalk it up to them either not believing it was her, or not having an interest in trying to kill the demigoddess, who had stabbed someone in the eye the last time she visited. Don't you think they'll? Evylyn let her voice drop, as the stern glare of the awaiting guard practically tore through her. Not want me here, I mean. Did you see the way the townspeople were looking at me? You'll be fine if they have a problem with you. They'll have to go through me. As if to prove her point. Vareia used her free arm to flex her muscles. Evylyn would have laughed. But all she could muster was a shaky smile. Halt. Citizens, the guard hissed. His hand on the hilt of his sword. Or should I say criminals? Criminals, Vareia blinked. Looking up at Evylyn before glancing at the guard. I don't see any criminals here. Right there. The guard growled. Unsheathing his sword and jabbing it at Evylyn. She took a startled step back. And Vareia walked in front of her, eyes narrowed. She's not a criminal, she's a hero. There's a solution to the disease that's been plaguing your city. And it's in her hands if you don't let her in. Your town will continue to suffer. The guard froze. His green eyes warming slightly. But he did not relent his hold on his sword. And how am I to know this witch won't enter and kill everyone in sight? There is a bounty on her head for a reason. Do you have dead bodies lying around the hall? Evylyn retorted. To which the guard narrowed his eyes. No. He said after a moment, swiftly stepping to the side. He beckoned for them to enter. But as Evylyn walked inside, she could feel the tip of the guard's sword digging into her back. You make one wrong move and you're dead, witch. If the council doesn't arrest you first, that is. They can try to arrest me, Evylyn thought. Rolling her eyes, hasn't worked in the past. She was led to the meeting room. A spacious room with a long table and chairs at the top of the stairs constructed at the end. It was structured similarly to a throne room. But instead of a king or queen sitting at the top, there were 5 mortals. The red and gold hues from the tapestries and braziers surrounding them bathed the hall in a fiery light. And Evylyn found herself dragging her feet across the plush carpet that ran from one side of the room to the other. The murmurs that had been rippling through the board came to a halt as they noticed the 4 souls before them. What is the meaning of this? A feminine voice rang out the question, chilled. We are here to discuss private matters. Not entertain some peasants, Louver, please. A masculine voice said, chuckling, excuse her, but yes. Why have you brought these? The man trailed off as they neared enough for Evylyn to be recognizable. Whispers tore through the group again. Incensed and hushed a moment later. The same man spoke. Have you brought a wanted criminal into the vicinity? Well, yes, the guard said, but she says she has a cure. A cure, the other woman said. Icy interest lighting in her orange eyes. Her long fingers framed her sharp face as she tilted her head. Go on. The guard jabbed his sword deeper into Evylyn's skin. Though not with enough power to break skin. She scoffed, swallowing her nerves before looking up to the council. My name is Evylyn. You know me as someone who practices banned magic. But I present myself to you as someone who has harnessed necromancy magic to cure, not destroy. When she was met by silent interest, she held up her bottle. I've been working on a cure for this disease for years. Though I did not cause it, she said. Narrowing her eyes, I wanted to help fix it. With this recipe you can cure all of Ensceas HM. Another voice said. Their crimson eyes wide as they stared at the golden bottle. And you know this works, Evylyn nodded. The same mortal was silent for a moment before shrugging and looking at the other council members. I don't see why we shouldn't allow her to show us this. Because necromancy is banned, Louvi. Her strong features flared, protested. There's a reason she's a criminal. But if she speaks the truth, and she used necromancy to solve this, then surely it can't be all bad, the sane mortal. A fixess said. I think we can all benefit from thinking a little more open-mindedly. This is why I voted against you. The strong-featured woman grumbled, well, I was voted in for a reason, Louvi. The fixess replied before gesturing to the guard behind Evylyn. Bring in one of the prisoners. The guard obeyed. It was quick, as the prison was connected to Ensceas's great hall. Evylyn had found that out years ago. And the mortal was in a worse state than Griner had been. With the scaly rash Griner had developed plastered over their entire body. Her eyes were bloodshot. And her hair was a tangled mess of black. Evylyn stepped forward, her hands trembling as she handed the potion to the guard. He took it without a word, uncapping it and slipping the mixture into the prisoner's lips. Evylyn's skin was clammy as she tried to breathe evenly, closing her eyes. The thought of this all being for nothing was practically all she could think about. But a moment later, the same amazing transformation Griner had gone through healed the mortal. Her skin cleared, becoming smooth and black. And her blue eyes cleared, she gasped, shuddering. Like it was the first clear breath she'd taken in years. Her body trembled as Evylyn's hands had. But when she dragged her eyes up to Evylyn, a weak smile had grown on her face. The council was silent. Have you made any more of these, Evylyn? The man asked after a moment. We have dozens. Evylyn said, her mouth dry and heart pounding. Deep down she hadn't expected this to work. It requires both a necromancy and healing mage to do. I imagine we don't have any necromancers in Ensceas right now. the man said, chuckling. He looked at the other council members, smiling. I say her ban is lifted. And she is given housing within the city to cure the sickly. I don't see why not, the fixess said. Wait. Luvi snapped, curling her hand into a fist. She is a criminal. Why would we allow her in the city? She just performed a miracle, Luvi, the man said. She can help us cure our people. Do you not want that? Luvi remained silent, crossing her arms with a huff. We will congregate and figure out your reward. Evylyn, the man continued, stay in the local inn. And we will send a courier when we are ready for you to return. You have done Ensceas a great service if you are truly able to heal every sick individual. Thank you. Whatever Evylyn wanted to say was replaced by an odd-sounding wheeze. And she simply smiled when she realized she wasn't going to be saying anything intelligible. The pressure from her back was lifted. And Vareia guided her outside, practically jumping for joy as she did. Glimmer advanced past them, saying they'd book a room in the inn the mortals spoke of. Evylyn felt she didn't want to argue against someone doing a favor for her. Which was a first. We did it. Vareia squealed as Glimmer walked away, twirling in place as she threw her hands into the air. I'm so proud of you, Evylyn. Evylyn wanted to reply, but with her head swimming, she slid down a tree trunk as she looked up to Vareia. Before she could respond, Vareia was sitting in the dirt with her. I always knew you could do it, Vareia said, voice a gentle caress, as she took Evylyn's hand in her own. All of the feelings Evylyn had bottled up for Vareia in the past weeks felt as though it was going to overflow. And Evylyn would be glad to let that happen. Evylyn pulled away slightly to look Vareia in the eyes, biting her lip as warmth shot throughout her body. Vareia met her eyes, and she could hear the Simmerbil's breathing quicken. And before she knew it, she was leaning in. She took Vareia's lips in hers, which were somehow softer than her eyes. Vareia wasted no time in returning the kiss, and Evylyn could feel Vareia's gentle hand cup her jaw. Her curls brushed Evylyn's face, and Evylyn pushed them away as she wrapped her arms around Vareia's shoulders. Vareia was warm, she was fierce, and best of all, she was perfect, maybe not perfect to others, but perfect to Evylyn. After a moment, Evylyn drew back and Vareia followed, breathlessly smiling. Her hair was wild, and she looked like she wanted to pull Evylyn back in. But instead she quietly said, that was really nice. Evylyn laughed, genuine happiness alighting in her soul for the first time in years. She took one of Vareia's hands with both of her own, and it felt natural. Meeting you was the best thing to ever happen to me, Evylyn said, grinning as tears welled in her eyes, resting her forehead against Vareia's. She closed her eyes, letting the tears drip down her cheeks. She felt lighter now, like the perpetual weight she'd been carrying on her shoulders had been lifted. All the pain she'd been through, all the pain she'd seen, she'd grown stronger from it. And she'd done things she'd never have thought possible. She'd also come to realize something. She'd finally done something for the benefit of others. She was proud. The end. Thank you for watching this video, and we hope it has inspired and entertained you. If you wish to join a community that loves Dark Divide, to discuss, share and explore with other fans, then please subscribe to our channel. We have a vibrant community waiting for you to join. Click subscribe to begin your community journey, and let's create more beautiful memories together.